This is David Mould. I'm reading from my book Postcards from the Borderlands. This excerpt is entitled The Borders of Johannesburg. 2 adult tickets, please. I passed 2 100-rand bills under the glass window of the ticket booth at Johannesburg's Apartheid Museum. I handed 1 ticket to my wife Stephanie. "Mine looks different from yours," she said. We examined them. Stephanie had been issued a white ticket. Mine was a non-white ticket. "You go in separate entrances," the man in the ticket booth explained. Apartheid is an Afrikaans word meaning separateness or the state of being apart, literally aparthood. Our moment of confusion offered a brief but safe glimpse of what the state of being apart meant for South Africans for half a century. The museum issues white and non-white tickets on a random basis. Of course, there's no gun-toting museum guard with a snarling dog to make sure you're using the correct entrance, but the designation is a potent symbol of how daily life was for people of all races. Your ticket takes you to separate exhibits on identity documents based on your randomly assigned racial status. Then the white and non-white paths converge. The history, ideology, and social impact of apartheid and the domestic and global resistance to it are documented in images, media, artifacts, and oral history interviews. It is a nuanced history because apartheid was a complex, many-faceted form of racial segregation. For example, one exhibit explains that almost every year some people were able to legally petition to change their racial status. No museum, however well designed and curated, can really take you back in time to experience the brutality of an authoritarian system and the policy of divide and rule in its most severe form. But if you do not rush through the exhibits, if you take the time to stop and reflect, the Apartheid Museum comes as close as any museum can. On my first visit, I left after several hours feeling deeply unsettled. I knew more than when I had entered, but realized there was so much more I did not know. In later visits to Johannesburg, I returned 3 more times. As I talked with South African colleagues, I began to think about borders that still exist. As a legal system, apartheid was officially abolished in 1991, but its impact is still felt in many areas of society, the economy, and daily life. It tells you something about how South Africa has changed since the end of apartheid that the sprawling townships of Soweto outside Johannesburg are now on the tourist bus routes. Soweto, derived from the acronym for Southwestern Townships, came to world attention on June 16, 1976, when mass protests erupted over the government's policy of enforcing Afrikaans as the only language of instruction in schools. Police opened fire on 10,000 secondary school students marching from a high school to a stadium. Official reports claimed 23 people were killed, but most historians put the death toll at 176 or higher. Among them was 12-year-old Hector Peterson, his death marked in an iconic photograph of friends carrying his body. The protests, shootings, and arrests continued. Worldwide reaction to the crackdown increased pressure for economic sanctions against South Africa and led some African countries to provide a safe haven for African National Congress cadres engaged in armed resistance. Although many more protests occurred over the next 15 years, some historians regard the Soweto massacre as the beginning of the end for apartheid. In 1976, Soweto was an urban slum. Blacks lived in small block and brick houses or in 1- or 2-room shacks with leaky metal roofs. Hot in summer, drafty in winter. Many did not have electricity or gas. Families cooked and heated with wood, and children did their homework by oil lamps. Soweto had a large coal-fired power station that belched smoke over the townships. but the electricity went east to Johannesburg's businesses, factories, and white middle-class suburbs. Every day blacks made the long journey to work, to mines, factories and offices, and to the suburbs to work as cooks, cleaners and gardeners. Because of past laws, they were not allowed to stay in the city at night without official permission. Crowded living conditions in Soweto bred crime, domestic violence and disease. Soweto today is economically and socially mixed. Most of the shacks have gone, replaced by public housing. There are middle-class districts with ranch-style homes, well-tended lawns, hotels and bed and breakfasts. Soweto has parks, shopping malls, and 2 massive sports stadiums, Soccer City and Orlando Stadium, built for the 2010 World Cup. Near Orlando Stadium is one of Soweto's mega-churches. With its sweeping architecture and multi-story parking lot, it looks like a transplant from Atlanta or Dallas. New roads have replaced the dirt and potholed streets, and a major 4-lane highway runs east-west through the townships. There are businesses and industrial parks with aspirational names such as the Soweto Empowerment Zone. There's even a Soweto Country Club where, on a sunny Sunday morning, the golfers were out in force. The landscape of the townships is scarred by a century of gold mining, with strip-mine hillsides and tipples. There are open patches of scrubland with goats grazing and too much trash, but overall Soweto has enjoyed an economic and social revival. People actually move to Soweto from other districts of Johannesburg because the housing is affordable and municipal services have improved. The crime rate has dropped to close to the average for the city. My Soweto tour was courtesy of my colleague and friend Andrew Carlson. His dissertation research was on the economic impact of the 2010 World Cup on Soweto, especially on small businesses, and he knows his way around. That's helpful because although most streets are now paved, they don't all have names. In some Soweto townships, the roads fan out from a central point like spokes on a wheel. In others, there's no intelligible road plan. Most businesses in Soweto are small scale, run out of hole-in-the-wall shops with hand-painted signs. The typical developing world row of businesses: a small grocery store next to a storefront church, then a fish and chip shop, a construction materials yard, a cooking school, a liquor store, a mobile phone stall, a funeral parlour, a beauty parlour, and a tyre repair shop. You can buy food, earn salvation, get takeout, buy lumber, learn to cook, get drunk, buy airtime, get fitted for a casket, get a perm, and have a puncture fixed on the same street, although maybe not in that chronological order. The tuck shop, a term familiar to British listeners, especially those who endured boarding school, is a small counter or stall selling snacks, candy and soft drinks, but perhaps also, under the counter, cigarettes and beer. I was taken aback by the number of funeral parlours and their aggressive marketing. 21st century funerals, tombstones at incredibly low prices. Pay 5 rand, that's 50 cents a month, get 2,000 rand, $200, funeral cover. Most of the drinking is done in the shebeens, the neighbourhood bars. The word is of Irish origin, derived from shebeen, meaning illicit whiskey. Shebeens, usually managed by women, operated from basements, attics, sheds, garages and living rooms in Ireland, Scotland, England, Canada, and the English-speaking Caribbean, but they became an institution in southern Africa, especially Malawi, Namibia, Zimbabwe and South Africa. In the apartheid era, when alcohol sales were strictly controlled, home-brewed beer was an important part of the informal economy. Shebeens were the only public drinking establishments open to blacks, who were banned from pubs, bars and restaurants reserved for whites. In many African societies, the role of alcohol brewing has traditionally been assigned to women, so shebeens were operated by the so-called shebeen queens, who sold home-brewed and distilled alcohol. The shebeens provided a place for people to meet, listen to music, dance, and discuss social and political issues. Although owners and patrons faced periodic police raids and arrests, the shebeens remained important social centres throughout the apartheid era. The Apartheid Museum displays photos of township residents arrested, both for breaches of the pass laws and for illegal home brewing. Today, shebeens are legal and are an integral part of South African urban culture. Most tourists on the typical Soweto in 3 hours minibus tour go to Walter Sisulu Square, named for a prominent African National Congress leader. It's in Kliptown. It's an architectural statement in grey concrete with a funnel-like memorial commemorating the signing of the 1955 Freedom Charter, a statement of the core principles of the African National Congress and its political allies. The Charter was officially adopted on Sunday, June the 26th, at a gathering of about 3,000 people, known as the Congress of the People. It was read in full, with the crowd roaring its approval of each section. When the police broke up the meeting on the second day, ANC activist Nelson Mandela, whose movements had been restricted, slipped away by disguising himself as a milkman. The Soweto of the 1976 protests is now literally history, preserved in books and archives, in the remarkable photographs and oral testimonies of the Apartheid Museum, and in the memories of older residents. Yet the economic and social conditions that gave rise to the protests against the apartheid regime persist. A black middle and upper middle class has emerged, but the gap between the wealthy and the poor is as wide as ever. Many are disappointed that politicians have not fulfilled the promises made in the heady days of the early 1990s. Postcards from the Borderlands by David Mould, published by Open Books, is available from Amazon and other online booksellers.